Ti West's trilogy involving Mia Goth made quite a splash in the horror community, especially its second installment, Pearl, which has helped popularize the female rage trope in cinema and across social media. The trilogy takes you on a journey through different periods in cinema history, and each movie has its own distinct look. X pays homage to the slasher genre, particularly the aesthetics of 1970s horror. Pearl is heavily influenced by Technicolor films of the 1930s and 40s, and Maxine takes inspiration from 1980s thrillers and the giallo genre. The cinematography, the editing, the world building of each movie is immaculate. It's clear that Ti West knows his references and source material very well. His goal was to commemorate the craft of filmmaking, which can be fascinating, especially to the hardcore film nerds. But for a general viewer, it might not be enough. Behind all the pretty aesthetics, there is really not much depth when it comes to storytelling. When asked whether the final movie Maxine, which according to many viewers is the weakest and most disappointing one out of 3, has any particular messaging, Ti West explained, quote, "No, I don't really sit down and do that. There may be people that will extrapolate whatever they want from the movie, and that's subjective. But I think if you sit down and try to do that, then in my opinion, you are adding a sense of propaganda to the creative experience. Maybe you agree with all the propaganda, but it pollutes the experience. If it's subconsciously in there, if it's in the subtext, or people are taking that from it, great. That's what art seems to do to people. But if you sit down and you try to go, I have a message and I'm going to just disguise it in a movie, it's a different process." End quote. I do share this sentiment. It's off-putting when a film's underlying agenda is overly blatant within its narrative. When the message is too on the nose, it risks undermining the very story it seeks to tell. It also underestimates the audience intelligence, leaving them feeling patronized in their ability to grasp the plot and draw their own conclusions. Personally, I found certain aspects of Pearl's monologue to be a bit redundant, mentioning things that you as a viewer pick up from watching the movie, and clearly serving as a device to connect the story with the first film X. But I'll talk about it in more detail later. The other side of the same coin is presenting the movie's themes at a very broad and surface level, leaving too much to the audience imagination. On paper, the X Trilogy explores the themes of ambition, fame, and success in the film/entertainment industry, but these ideas never really develop into any meaningful commentary. Each film gives the illusion of depth, leading you to believe it has much more to offer. However, by the end, you find yourself unsatisfied, realizing that it ultimately delivers style over substance, especially when you look at X and Maxine. It's not surprising that Pearl has become the most popular movie in the trilogy. It's very character-driven and has a clearer, more complex narrative. Essentially, the main story has 2 key female characters, Pearl and Maxine, who can be seen as different versions of the same woman, shaped by the distinct circumstances life has dealt them. The juxtaposition of Pearl and Maxine in the trilogy offers a fascinating examination of the pivotal role the parental influence plays in shaping the trajectories of children's lives. And that's what I want to focus on in my review of the trilogy, and I'll start with Pearl. In 1918, Pearl, a young woman in her 20s, resides on a Texas farm with her German immigrant parents while her husband Howard serves in World War I. She's responsible for helping her mother maintain the farm and take care of her paralyzed and wheelchair-bound father, all while they're trying to remain isolated to protect themselves against the Spanish flu. Inspired by the movies, Pearl spends her days longing for a more glamorous life, imagining herself as a renowned dancer.
One day the whole world's gonna know my name.
Pearl is young and extremely aware that the world can offer her far more, with endless possibilities awaiting her beyond the farm's confines. But as you watch the story unfold, you realize that there is something deeply wrong with Pearl. She's not just an innocent girl dreaming of a bigger life. The lack of control over her circumstances brings forth the worst aspects of her character. She enjoys inflicting pain on smaller beings, like a goose who interrupts her fantasy of being a star, or someone who can't really fight back like her father. She struggles to control her negative emotions, her selfishness and jealousy, and gets completely consumed by them.
You guys get everything you want.
Her inability to reconcile her dreams with reality drives her to full madness and psychosis, which culminates in her killing many people, including her parents, sister-in-law, and a projectionist whom she cheats on Howard.
I'm married!
Pearl doesn't want to stay on the farm until her death, but she feels trapped and powerless to change this situation. She shifts all the blame onto others, expecting them to rescue her from her predicament. Pearl blames Howard for wanting a farm life and for choosing to go to war when he had a chance of avoiding it.
If only his pride hadn't gotten him involved in this dreadful war. You know, we had a doctor willing to declare him ineligible.
When Pearl meets the projectionist and hears that he has been to Europe, she sees him as a way out.
Tell me more about Europe. When can we go?
And most of all, Pearl wishes for her parents' death, believing that only then can her real life start, which proves to be wrong when it finally happens.
One day my mother and father will be gone. I can do what I want then.
This is a sentiment that resonates with many, and it adds a layer of authenticity and sympathy to Pearl's character. It's scary to take risks, to follow your dreams, so we keep postponing it, citing the wrong timing, but we all know that the perfect time to start anything is now.
You only get one take at this life.
The movie seems to suggest that both nature and nurture contributed to Pearl becoming a full-on serial killer who you later see in X. Intense emotions, her erratic outbursts, her fixations that turn into obsessions that border on delusions, all of these things might indicate that she has some sort of mental problem. Maybe her brain works differently.
I know because I feel things very deeply.
I'm not sure if deriving pleasure from harming animals is inherent. I like to believe that it's not. Similar to her lack of care for others and their feelings. The low empathy partly can be down to her genes, but for the most part, I see it as a consequence of bad parenting. As Pearl says, she was relieved when her baby died because it was tying her down to the farm and to the life she deeply resents, and not because she's a sociopath.
How could I be responsible for another life? Life terrifies me.
The crushing weight of Pearl's upbringing and environment is what finally pushes her into a killer territory. Her mother Ruth has a cold, authoritarian presence. It's very likely that she's created the shell out of necessity to ensure the survival and protection of her family, especially as an immigrant. This is her way of having control in a very chaotic and unpredictable period in history. There's no time for dreams and pleasure when you struggle to put food on the table for your family.
Getting what you want isn't what's important. Making the most of what you have is.
However, this hard exterior turned Ruth into a bitter and resentful person. She forgot how to connect with people, how to be loving and caring. Ruth projects her own fears and life disappointments onto Pearl, nipping any spark of ambition she has in the bud.
Why do you hate me, Mama?
Ruth's relentless criticism of her daughter's inadequacies and failures completely erodes Pearl's self-esteem. It makes perfect sense that Ruth becomes her first victim.
You are not better than me!
Pearl in Pearl is not a calculating, charming, manipulative murderer. She can't lie for the life of her.
We don't have a dog.
I thought you said you did in the cellar.
Oh.
Pearl's killings are driven by impulse, triggered whenever she feels wronged or rejected. Each act of violence is deeply tied to her insecurities and desire for control. The murder of her father, however, stands out as the one instance where her actions seem less emotional, but that is because in her twisted mind, it's the next practical step.
There's a dance audition this Saturday at our church.
In her increasingly delusional state, Pearl convinces herself that she basically has already secured a place in the dance troupe. She's going to be picked 100%, prompting her to pack her bags and prepare to leave the farm. To Pearl, ending her father's life seems entirely logical, as there is no one else left to care for him when she's gone. Perhaps she even believes that she is mercifully ending his suffering. This act reflects the depths of her detachment from reality and her warped sense of responsibility. The portrayal of Pearl's motivations in X, however, feels inconsistent, and the overall character arc becomes somewhat disjointed. I was a bit disappointed that the prequel didn't explore the relationship between Pearl and Howard. At the very end, when Howard finally comes home and sees the corpses, he's horrified. How does Pearl explain it to him? Does he eventually find out that his wife killed his sister? I totally understand that not everything has to be explained, but the couple's dynamic is such a big part of X that it feels frustrating not to touch on it in any way in Pearl. It would have made more sense for Howard to not be fazed by the scene, to just be excited to see Pearl. As a viewer, you would have understood that he is just as unhinged as she is. That maybe the war changed changed him. The prequel does not provide sufficient context to understand what drives Howard to fully support Pearl's horrible actions and be so loyal to her. I really can't see why Pearl would turn into a serial killer who would purposefully lure people on the farm. As Howard says in X, other young people stayed at their guest house before. The couple's casual approach to violence, from the way they discuss the killings to how they handle the bodies, indicates that this isn't a new experience for them. It's entirely understandable why Pearl would become jealous of Maxine and the whole group of young, ambitious people walking around her farm, igniting all those old wounds and jealousy from the past. But Pearl in X is driven by a profound sense of loss and a desperate yearning for the youth and beauty she once possessed.
I was young once too.
Her insatiable sexual drive becomes the central point of the story.
Tell me I'm yours. You still want me.
Something that was only mentioned in passing in Pearl during the famous monologue, and even in there the context is slightly different. Pearl never said that Howard couldn't satisfy her, or that she had a strong desire to sleep around. You get the picture that Pearl is regretting choosing Howard as a partner. She viewed him as her savior in the beginning, since he came from a good, wealthy family. But as soon as he expressed his desire to live on a farm, Pearl started to resent him. That is why she was looking at other men. I don't think she truly loves Howard. There are a couple of sexual scenes in Pearl, but to me they don't really explore the character's sexual nature that much, especially the type of nature that is shown in X. This is a person who values sex deeply. It's an integral part of their personality.
You know I can't.
The scene with the scarecrow in the cornfield serves as a representation of Pearl's profound isolation and her desperate longing for affection, rather than signaling sexual repression or an extremely sensual nature. It also shows her struggle to separate fantasy from reality. When I was watching this scene, I couldn't help but think that it was created to, firstly, have a reference to X without delving into the subject deeply and seriously, and secondly, show how weird and uncanny Pearl is. Grab the audience attention at the beginning of the story. The scene where the projectionist shows Pearl a stag film acts as another thematic linked to X, reinforcing the motive of movie making while also revealing the projectionist's character. However, it fails to offer any meaningful insight into Pearl's psyche. Although she appears intrigued, she quickly changes the subject, leaving the moment devoid of any deeper exploration of her sexuality. Even when Pearl decides to sleep with the projectionist, she doesn't do it because of her sexual desire, but because she's scared and wants to be comforted after having a horrible fight with her mother. In the prequel, Pearl, the character, expresses insecurity about her appearance.
I'm not pretty or naturally pleasant or friendly.
And at the same time, she's not bothered by the way she looks, since she's a farm girl. While she enjoys wearing pretty dresses, these appear more as a gateway to her fantasies, rather than a reflection of her concerns about beauty or self-image. Characters can indeed evolve, and it's plausible that as Pearl's dreams remained unfulfilled, her delusions intensified. However, it's the viewers who are left to draw the connections and theories and explain all the gaps, and it's a huge gap of 60 years, as the narrative itself fails to make them explicit. I hoped for the themes of sexuality and beauty to be more firmly rooted in Pearl's backstory as well. If you look at Pearl and X as separate stories with their own characters, they work pretty well. I like the way X centers around the themes of aging and regret and sex. Occasionally, it does veer into caricature, relying heavily on shock value. The film's most memorable element is the crazy horny grandma, while its other aspects cover familiar ground seen in countless slashes before. The tragedy of Pearl as a character lies in the haunting reality of what the absence of parental unconditional love can do to a person. It doesn't in any way justify what Pearl does to others, but it does explain it. In her pursuit of unconditional love and support, she became the very nightmare she sought to escape. She turned into the worst version of her own mother. When Pearl meets Maxine, she tells her that they're exactly the same. But how true is this statement? Maxine, also a young woman in her 20s, shares a common thread with Pearl when it comes to her upbringing. She was also raised by a domineering parent, her father, a televangelist who likes spreading his gospels of sin and salvation through televised sermons.
There she is, my beautiful little daughter, Maxine.
His rigid worldview left little room for Maxine to explore her own dreams and desires, which likely led to her feeling trapped in her father's expectations.
Letting outdated traditions control how you live your life will get you nowhere.
The absence of her mother, for whatever reason, and the oppressive environment of the church Maxine grew up in possibly fostered a sense of rebellion in her, finally driving her to explore her own identity outside the religious confines. Compared to Ruth, however, Maxine's father always believed that his daughter was special, that she was destined to become an important member of the church, just like him.
That's my little girl.
He instilled in Maxine a sense of confidence and discipline, something Ruth failed to do for Pearl by demanding blind obedience. You never see Pearl studying or practicing dancing. Instead of rehearsing her routine for the audition, she spends time with the projectionist.
But you gotta practice, remember?
That is something Maxine would never do. She will stay up all night practicing her lines if she has to.
If you need to read off the sides we gave you, just go ahead, all right?
I know the lines.
The self-reliance is what makes Maxine so different and what allows her to not be afraid to leave the church and her father. Even though Maxine's confidence can sometimes feel excessive and over the top,
You're a fucking sex symbol.
I have cosmopolitan taste. I'm a f***ing star! Ain't nobody else like me.
You're a fucking movie star.
she doesn't have her head fully in the clouds. She knows she has to put 110% into everything she does, even shooting an amateur porn movie. She demonstrates a remarkable ability to navigate rejection while maintaining a focus on the positives. She learns from her mistakes.
You want the good news or the bad news?
Bad.
Rejections never end. That is what it takes to be successful. Poor Pearl could never survive in the industry, and I think it wasn't even what she truly wanted. It was more about the sense of comfort and security and excitement she believed it could grant her. But Maxine, she definitely wants the attention. She strives to be seen as the best in the eyes of others. Maxine is capable of violence, but only when her life or well-being is directly threatened, which again solidifies her status as a good survivor. The massacre on the farm undoubtedly has hardened her character even more.
Strip.
What?
But it doesn't mean that she's without any shortcomings. While Maxine's drive for fame and success is admirable, it causes her to emotionally distance herself from others. She doesn't trust people that easily, she never lets her guard down.
You're supposed to help me save the next girl's life. Maybe she should save herself.
And this mental pressure she's putting on herself is going to catch up with her eventually. It already has. She's a drug addict. Maxine's constant quest for external validation and her inability to be satisfied with her accomplishments suggests that she may be grappling with more deep-seated emotional issues. That is something Maxine the movie surprisingly decided not to focus on, the dark side of fame and success and dreams. I think many expected maybe another character study, but what you end up getting is X Part 2, but sillier and more undercooked. All the secondary characters serve as fillers. You see them for a minute and then they get killed off. Even Maxine's supposed friend, whom she's meant to care about, fails to evoke any emotional response. The conflict between Maxine and her father is murky, which leaves a significant aspect of her motivation insufficiently explained. It diminishes the emotionally cathartic impact his death is supposed to have on Maxine and on you as a viewer by the end of the story. The father has such a heavy and eerie presence in X, even though you just hear him in the background most of the time, that it's unsatisfying to see him being so cartoonish in Maxine.
The star!
The private investigator also doesn't feel like a real threat. And I know that many giallo films have silly, nonsensical plots, but at least they're fun and entertaining and they fully commit to the bit. Maxine is a mishmash of things, and that is what I don't like about X and Maxine. The fact that they rely so much on recreating the atmosphere of their influences that they fail to establish their own identities and be memorable. The character of Maxine remains stagnant throughout the whole movie, despite the intense situations she encounters. These experiences don't lead to any substantial growth or change or self-reflection. Her ambitious drive that made her so special in X becomes her cage, turning her into an almost one-dimensional character and making her journey feel repetitive. If you remove the third movie, the story will remain the same. You still don't know if Maxine will succeed in her pursuit of stardom or completely burn herself out.
I will not accept a life I do not deserve.
When Pearl says she and Maxine are the same, she's recognizing that their respective journeys to assert their own identities are rooted in similar psychological turmoil, stemming from the oppressive environments their parents imposed. Pearl's mother and Maxine's father each call their daughters monsters.
Malevolence is festering in you. I see it.
But I created a monster. Forgive me.
Their children are the direct manifestation of their own failings as parents. They are mirrors that force them to face the unsettling truth about the kind of monsters they themselves have turned into. What would you choose? To experience life and feelings so deeply that it risks emotional instability, to put it nicely, like Pearl, or to guard yourself from any sign of vulnerability to the point of emptiness, like Maxine? Both paths lead to their own kind of destruction.
Failing a child is the greatest sin of all.
But Maxine's father gifted his daughter with a crucial character trait: belief in her self-worth, the foundation of success.
You didn't fail me, Daddy. You gave me just what I needed.
This obviously helps Maxine respond to her circumstances in a better way than Pearl. Pearl succumbs to her despair. She is driven by a deep rage and a destructive pursuit of control, while Maxine channels her struggle into ambition and a need for self-assertion. Maxine's response is more proactive and calculated compared to Pearl's, which is impulsive and chaotic, leading her to a life of deep misery. Maxine's character in some way embodies the hope that you can turn your life around if you really want to, that you don't have to become your mother or father, that everyone deserves to be the star of their own life. This is what Pearl and Maxine refer to when they say it. It's not really about fame, it's about autonomy. And that is what everybody should strive for, being the star of your own story, rather than searching for validation in a world that can never truly offer it.